Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Marisela from EVPL Central, and this is my dear friend Layla.
Welcome to my home.
Thank you, Layla. Layla is going to take us to Syria through Syria's cuisine because you're watching Around the World in Evansville.
I'm going to be making a Syrian dish called 𝐀𝐫𝐸𝐿, and it's kind of like a Syrian casserole, for lack of a better word. It involves, as you'll see tomorrow when you come back, a beautiful hand-hammered brass platter with pita bread on top. The saffron rice goes on top of that. The meats that we'll be marinating today will go on top of that. And then we will top that with nuts, a special Lebanese sauce, parsley, and it'll be full of flavor.
Layla, my mouth is watering. Who taught you how to make all this?
Yeah, so my grandmother, my aunts in Syria, which is where we spent most of our childhood summers. We would typically, within a week of school ending, we would travel to Syria where we would stay with our family there. So I have a very large family that still lives there today.
Do you go back often?
I don't, simply because I went back shortly after 9/11, which was difficult because a lot of things have changed obviously in the world. But since the war in Syria, it's very difficult to get out of the country once you're in. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to marinate our meats, and I do a combination of both. I do lamb chops as well as chicken. And it's really important when you're choosing your lamb that you choose a lamb that's either halal or organically grown and fed on grass only.
Why is that, Layla?
So when it is fed something else like corn, it becomes very muttony, more pungent, and not as, it doesn't have the same flavor. So to make the meat marinade, you start with about a cup of a nice olive oil, the juice of about 3 or 4 lemons, and then I actually chop all of my spices each time I make it because they're fresher. So you need about 4 sticks of cinnamon, Aleppo pepper,
Aleppo pepper, where would you get Aleppo pepper?
So Aleppo is a city in Syria, but I actually order Aleppo pepper online. About probably, and I haven't added these yet, but I'm going to say this is actually allspice, which is a good substitute for the Syrian spice called 𝐷. And so I'm just going to add maybe about 5 to 7 of those directly into this blender. And then 10 of the green cardamom pods, seeds and all. So you just put it in there, and this is one of my favorite spices in the whole world. It's very fragrant.
Yes.
I also add some salt, and then I add 4 bay leaves. And I just blend it up in my little NutriBullet, and this is going to be very loud. The onion will be part of the marinade, but then tomorrow when we sear the meat, we'll be searing the onion along with it. And then when it cooks in the broth, it will just deteriorate into nothing. So yummy. It's so good. Okay, so now we're going to assemble the marinade.
Okay.
But before we do that, I just wanted to let you know how I prep the meat. So I do wash all of my meat before I prepare it to get. Yeah. It's something my grandmother did.
Okay.
It's something my mother did. It's something my maternal grandmother did. So to put the marinade together, as I said before, you start with olive oil and the juice of 3 or 4 lemons, depending on how juicy they are. And then, if you remember, we just ground our spices.
Can you smell that?
Sure.
Oh, wow. Okay, and I see the bay leaves are still
and that's okay. That's okay because we'll pick those out of the sauce. We'll strain the sauce before we finish the dish. Okay. So if it doesn't all get completely powdered, that's okay. So we will just put those spices in there. Let me grab
it. It smells incredible. It smells divine.
It is With the allspice, the cinnamon, the cardamom adds just an incredible scent. But as you can see, it just makes this rich, brown, spicy marinade. And then I put half on the chicken breasts. And then I've chopped up the one onion before, so I'm going to divvy the onion up. And the one thing that onion and things like lemon juice do is they tenderize the meat, as well as adding flavor.
Yes.
So, and then the other thing that I do is for each container of meat, I mince 2 cloves of garlic. And I always use fresh garlic. I think it makes such a difference.
It does.
This is, I like fresh garlic. And I always use my hands. So
Of course.
if you mix it all up, get the marinade to coat your lamb chops, get the onions all around. And if you've ground your spices and there's still a little bay leaf that isn't completely ground, that's okay, because the sauce will be strained beforehand and will remove all of that. Okay, and that is our marinated meat. We will leave this in the fridge overnight and come back to it tomorrow.
It's day 2, and I'm back at Layla's house to finish up the cooking.
Hello, Layla. Welcome. Good. Okay, so we're going to start off where we left off. And if you remember, we marinated both our chicken and our lamb overnight in the marinade that we made yesterday. And today we're going to sear it before we actually boil it, so that we sear in the flavors, and it just adds another dimension of flavor whenever you sear it on the outside. So the first step is to just put olive oil in your pan. And again, if you want the full Syrian flavor, you can use clarified butter or ghee. And then we're just going to put our meat along with the onions and the spices and everything in here. Everything is browned, so we're going to add all of our meat back in, along with the juices that we had the meat in. And then with the lamb, since I already have the bones in, I'm not using a lamb broth, but the traditional way to do it is to use a lamb roast. And you would make a lamb stock with it, where you would add garlic and parsley and the lamb bones and cook it down. And we're going to do the same thing with the chicken. And you just want to cover it to the top of the meat. We're going to add a cinnamon stick to both the lamb chops and the chicken breasts. And we're also going to add a couple of basil leaves to each of them, because if you remember, we're going to be taking this water, cooking it down to about half to make a nice sauce. So we want to make sure we flavor that sauce. The other thing that I add more of is some salt. Not a lot, but just enough to get everything, all of our flavors melded together. So now we're going to caramelize the savory nuts that are going to be sprinkled on top of the dish after it's assembled. What we need for this is fancy pine nuts, blanched almonds, and what blanched almonds are just almonds that don't have the skin on them, okay? These are the traditional nuts that have been used in this dish for many, many years. I've already ground all of our spices. So this is actually a stick and a half of cinnamon. It's about 10 allspice, and then I've added a little bit of Aleppo pepper and some salt in here as well. So the first step is to add olive oil to the pan, and be generous because it will coat the nuts. And the way that you make a candied nut, this is very similar, only it's a savory nut. And all of those spices get crunchy and crispy on top of all of the nuts. Okay, so the nuts are coated with olive oil, and now is when I'm going to add our spice mixture. And I'll just kind of sprinkle it all over the nuts, give them a little mix so that I don't get too much on one nut. You want them to get a good toast on them to where they're lightly browned but not burnt. The pine nuts get a little bit bitey if you cook them too long.
Right.
And once you start this process, you have to keep tossing, and you can't. So if you look at the nuts, you'll see that the pine nuts will brown a lot faster and a lot quicker than the almonds. But this is where we want to be, right here. We talked about the 5 components of this dish, one of which is the lemonade sauce, which is basically a yogurt sauce. This is what it is. Typically, it's thicker than yogurt. It's like a strained yogurt, and it can be used as a cheese spread in a lot of cases. However, I could only find one, so we're going to be substituting.
And where do you find it?
You can find it in any international grocery store, but in Evansville, 𝐀𝐫𝐸, which is behind 𝐄𝐫𝐨𝐿 Cinemas on the east side, carries it.
Okay.
But I'm also going to need this for the meat gravy, so I'm going to save the rich strained yogurt for the meat. But the lemonade sauce, I will use Greek yogurt, which you can substitute Greek yogurt if you want. It's just not as thick. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to melt about 2 to 3 tablespoons of clarified butter.
That's the ghee.
Yes, the ghee. And then I'm going to add a little bit of flour just to make a roux. And this will be our thickening agent, especially since we're using Greek yogurt instead of the traditional lemonade. So we'll just cook this a little bit and whisk it so that we don't have clumps. Yeah, so now that we have cooked our flour and clarified butter mixture, or ghee, we're going to add our garlic, and this is 2 cloves of garlic. And we're just going to cook that garlic a little bit in that flour and butter mixture, just a little. So now we're going to add all of...
Wow, all of it. Okay.
All of it, yeah. And we're just going to stir, because it doesn't need to cook very much at all.
Okay.
And then I add salt to taste as well.
And sorry about the noise, folks. We've got the vent going on right above the camera.
Yes. So now, to distribute the flour, I'm just going to switch back to the whisk and really get that mixed up.
I see that it's getting a little thicker now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's from the roux mixture that we made originally. And it's done. That's all there is to that.
Wow, that was easy, and I've had it, and it's just so delicious.
Okay, so let me update you on where we are. The chicken is done. I have taken the meat from the skin and bones and thrown away the skin and bones. And I took the lamb chops out of the broth and I condensed it by half. And so we now have this wonderful brown lamb gravy with all of those spices. So now let's make the saffron rice. So saffron, which is extremely expensive, will color the rice yellow as well as add some flavor. I have about 6 or 7 strands of saffron in there. And I take that saffron and I put it in hot chicken broth. So you'll see here, this is the chicken broth from when we boiled the chicken. I'm going to use that in the saffron rice.
All good stuff, Layla.
Good. So I'm going to mix that, and then while we're doing everything else with the rice, I'm going to let that sit. That will soften the saffron. It will get the color and the flavor infused into the broth.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to make the rice in this pan. Let me go ahead and turn this on. And I'm going to add some olive oil. We're going to use a vermicelli, which is actually a Syrian vermicelli that's already broken up, and it's sold like this in a bag.
Oh.
Kind of like an angel hair pasta. Only,
Right.
you know, much, much shorter, as you can see here. So we start by heating the oil in the pan, and we're going to not crisp up, but just cook the onions until they're translucent. So now I'm going to take them and put them back in the bowl because I'm going to use my pan to toast the vermicelli in the olive oil. All right, so I'm going to put more olive oil in here. I'm going to throw in the vermicelli, and you just keep moving it until it's lightly toasted. You don't want it to be too toasted. But then what's nice is when the rice is done, you'll have these little tan strands all throughout the rice, and you'll have the bite of that pasta, which is really good.
Yeah.
And this is what you want it to look like when you're done. And now we're just going to add in the long grain rice. Okay. And we'll just toss that all around.
And you've turned off or you got on low?
I turned off the heat just so that it wouldn't keep cooking the vermicelli. And once I incorporate everything, I will turn it back on. So now I'm going to put our clarified onions, or not clarified, translucent onions, making clarified butter. And then we'll add that little bit of broth that we had our saffron in.
Right. Oh, wow, that smells amazing.
Thank you. And then we'll add the rest of our chicken broth that we cooked our chicken in. So it will have hints of cinnamon, garlic, bay leaf, all of that. And then we're also going to add about 2 teaspoons of turmeric.
Oh, it's going to taste wonderful with that and give it a beautiful color, too.
It will, it will. The saffron gives it color, but the turmeric really gives it a good yellow color. And then you just mix that really well. Make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom of the pan.
Okay.
And then you turn your heat on high until it comes to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, you turn it down to low, put a lid on it, and boil it for 20 minutes. Now we're going to finish our brown sauce or gravy that the lamb was cooking in. The first thing we're going to do is strain it, remove our bay leaves and our cinnamon stick. I'm going to add maybe about a cup of 𝐀𝐫𝐸 to it.
And that's the thicker yogurt.
Yeah, so 𝐀𝐫𝐸, 𝐿ebna is not how we say it in Arabic. It's leban in Arabic for yogurt. 𝐿eبنة is a yogurt cheese or a yogurt cheese spread. And you'll see how thick it is. Okay.
All right.
And then we're just going to mix that up. While we're stirring, we're going to turn the heat back on so that we can get the 𝐿eبنة to melt into the lamb broth.
That broth is just amazing. Did you cook it down a little bit?
I cooked it down by half.
Oh,
so do you see this line right here?
Yeah.
That's where it was when I took the meat out, and I cooked it down to here.
So it's really concentrated.
It's really concentrated. It's not terribly thick, but we don't want it terribly thick because we're going to pour it over the entire dish after we put it together. So since we were filming the making of 𝐀𝐫𝐸, I decided to turn it into a little dinner party. So this is pita bread that I got at the International Food Store. Typically I like the pita bread that's a little bit bigger and thinner, but they were out of it, and this is very good as well. Now, what my grandmother used to do is she used to actually cook it right on the gas flame and just heat it up and keep turning it until it got hot. So we're gonna do this until we have all of this covered. And this is the last one. We're starting with the rice. If you remember, we've already heated the bread and put it on the tray. And now we're gonna put the rice on top of the bread and just spread it out.
And you're plating it right before we sit down, right?
Right before we sit down, because it's a wide open plate and it cools off very quickly.
And it's amazing how our guest, your guest, just quieted down when we said we're gonna video.
Exactly, yes.
So you spread it all over the bread.
And we have a combination of the lamb as well as the chicken.
Okay, and the chicken, you've already taken it off the bone, taken the skin off.
Exactly. This is the lamb broth with the lemonade. But you don't have to use it all. You just want to put it on top of all of the meat, the rice, the bread. So traditionally, this meal is not eaten with a fork and knife. It's eaten with bread. And the nuts that we roasted.
Oh, those nuts are incredible.
And that makes it just, it gives it that crunch and ooh, that additional flavor. It's done is I have chopped parsley, kind of loosely chopped, so it's not very, very small. It still has its texture.
It looks beautiful too.
Thank you. And you just put parsley on top, and that's it. That is the mix.
Bravo, look at that.